Sir, I am going to need you to step out of first class. Your seat has been reassigned. The announcement was calm, professional, and loud enough for several nearby passengers to hear. Conversation slowed. A businessman lowered his newspaper. A mother waiting with her young daughter glanced toward the boarding lane. Even the gate scanner seemed unusually quiet for a brief moment, as dozens of travelers instinctively looked in the same direction. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we are glad you are here. Now, back to Marcus Ellison. Marcus looked up from his boarding pass without the slightest sign of frustration. At 48 years old, he had spent decades traveling through airports across the country. Delayed flights, weather cancellations, overbooked cabins, and unexpected schedule changes had long ago taught him that patience often solved more problems than raised voices ever could. "May I ask what changed?" he said politely. Standing across from him was Daniel Harper, the senior gate supervisor overseeing the boarding process for Flight 672 from Chicago to San Francisco. His pressed navy uniform reflected years of experience, and his expression suggested complete confidence in the information displayed on his tablet. "I apologize for the inconvenience, sir," Daniel replied. "There has been a seating adjustment. Your new boarding pass places you in economy." Marcus glanced once at the freshly printed boarding pass before quietly comparing it with the first-class ticket he had received less than 30 minutes earlier. The seat number had indeed changed. No explanation appeared beside the update. No additional notes were visible. Around them, boarding continued, although at a noticeably slower pace as nearby passengers quietly observed the exchange. Some assumed it was simply another airline issue. Others wondered whether an overbooking had occurred. No one knew enough to understand what had actually happened. Marcus carefully folded the new boarding pass and slipped it into the leather passport wallet he had carried for years. "I understand," he answered. "Could someone help me understand the reason for the reassignment?" Daniel briefly checked his tablet again. "The system reflects the change, sir. At the moment, this is the available assignment attached to your reservation." His tone remained professional, but firm. Marcus nodded once. "Thank you for checking." The simple response surprised several people standing nearby. Most travelers facing an unexpected downgrade argued immediately. Marcus did neither. He adjusted the strap of his worn leather briefcase and stepped aside to allow the next passenger to board. His calm reaction only made the situation feel more unusual. A young flight attendant waiting just inside the aircraft door noticed the interaction from several yards away. Emily Carter had been flying for less than a year, yet she had already learned that experienced travelers often revealed more through their composure than through their complaints. The gentleman who had just accepted an unexpected seat change without raising his voice carried himself with remarkable confidence. Not confidence rooted in status, but the quiet assurance of someone completely comfortable with himself. Daniel watched Marcus move toward the waiting area beside the jet bridge while continuing the boarding process. From his perspective, he had simply followed the reservation system exactly as company policy required. He had no reason to believe anything unusual was unfolding. Yet somewhere beyond the gate windows, another arriving aircraft had just reached the terminal. A passenger aboard that flight was walking toward this very departure gate, completely unaware that within a few minutes, one familiar face waiting quietly nearby would bring the entire situation into a very different light. Marcus Ellison settled into one of the chairs beside the boarding windows, resting his worn leather briefcase neatly beside his polished brown shoes. Beyond the glass, baggage carts moved beneath the evening sky while ground crews prepared the aircraft for departure. Around him, passengers continued boarding in small groups, some chatting excitedly about vacations while others hurried through work emails before takeoff. Marcus simply watched the activity with quiet interest. Airports had always fascinated him. Every terminal brought together thousands of strangers, each carrying a different destination, a different story, and a different set of assumptions. He slipped a fountain pen from his jacket pocket and opened a weathered leather notebook. Instead of reviewing financial reports, he began making handwritten notes for a leadership presentation he planned to deliver later that week in San Francisco. His handwriting remained deliberate and precise, every sentence carefully considered before reaching the page. Technology had transformed nearly every part of his business, yet he still trusted paper whenever ideas truly mattered. Across the boarding area, Daniel Harper continued assisting passengers with practiced efficiency. Every boarding pass received the same careful scan. Every luggage question received the same procedural answer. His attention remained focused on maintaining an on-time departure, unaware that the quiet gentleman sitting near the windows had become the subject of curious glances from several waiting travelers. Most expected someone who had just lost a first-class seat to argue with customer service or request a supervisor. Marcus did neither. His calm acceptance felt almost unusual in an environment where delays and seating changes often produced frustration. Just inside the aircraft door, Emily Carter discreetly observed the gate area between welcoming passengers on board. Something about Marcus continued to capture her attention. It was not his clothing. He wore dark jeans, a white button-down shirt beneath a charcoal sport coat, and carried no visible symbols of wealth or status. It was his composure. Every movement reflected patience rather than resignation. Every expression suggested confidence without demanding attention. Emily found herself wondering what kind of profession taught someone to remain so steady under unexpected circumstances. Nearby, two business travelers quietly exchanged opinions. "If they moved me from first class after I paid for it, I would be asking a lot more questions," one man whispered. His colleague nodded. "Maybe he already knows something we do not." Neither man intended to interfere. They simply continued watching from a respectful distance. Marcus eventually closed his notebook and checked the time on a simple stainless steel wristwatch that had accompanied him through countless business trips over the past 15 years. He reached into his briefcase and removed a neatly folded folder labeled Partnership Review. The title meant nothing to anyone nearby, yet the documents inside represented months of collaboration between several major organizations preparing to reshape the future of commercial aviation technology. Marcus glanced briefly toward the boarding gate as another announcement invited the final first-class passengers to board. He neither approached the counter nor questioned the earlier decision again. If there had been an honest mistake, facts would eventually clarify it. If there had been a legitimate operational reason, patience would accomplish more than confrontation. Daniel looked up from another boarding scan and noticed Marcus still sitting quietly by the window exactly where he had left him. For reasons he could not explain, he felt a brief moment of uncertainty. Everything in the reservation system appeared correct, yet something about the composed traveler suggested there might still be information that neither of them had seen. The boarding area gradually emptied as the final groups of passengers crossed the jet bridge, leaving only a handful of travelers waiting near the gate. Marcus Ellison remained seated beside the window, completely unhurried, his leather briefcase resting neatly at his feet. He glanced once toward the aircraft, then back to the partnership folder resting on his lap. Inside were carefully organized documents outlining the final phase of a technology initiative that had occupied nearly 3 years of planning. The project involved advanced passenger service systems designed to improve airline operations, reduce boarding errors, and create smoother experiences for travelers. Marcus smiled quietly to himself at the irony. Few things reminded innovators why improvement mattered more than witnessing imperfections firsthand. Daniel Harper completed another boarding scan before checking the departure clock mounted above the gate. Everything appeared on schedule. The reservation system still listed Marcus in economy. From Daniel's perspective, the matter had already been resolved according to company policy. Yet every time he looked toward the waiting area, he found Marcus exactly where he had been, patiently reviewing documents instead of demanding explanations. The unusual calm began creating questions Daniel had not expected to ask himself. Emily Carter stepped briefly into the gate area after another flight attendant relieved her at the aircraft door. She approached Daniel with quiet professionalism. "Is everything resolved with the gentleman whose seat changed?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "According to the reservation system, yes. He has been reassigned." Emily looked toward Marcus for a brief moment. "He seems remarkably composed." Daniel offered a small shrug. "Some passengers handle changes better than others." Emily accepted the answer, although something continued to feel incomplete. She had welcomed thousands of passengers during her first year with the airline. Most people who unexpectedly lost premium seating expressed disappointment, frustration, or confusion. Marcus displayed none of those emotions. Instead, he appeared more interested in preparing for whatever awaited him after landing than dwelling on what had already happened. Nearby, a retired airline pilot waiting for a connecting flight quietly observed the scene while reading an aviation magazine. After several minutes, he folded the publication and smiled toward Marcus. "Business trip?" he asked casually. Marcus returned the friendly smile. "Yes, sir." "San Francisco?" "That is right." The older man nodded. "Looks like an important one." Marcus glanced briefly at the folder resting on his lap. "Every meeting is important when people are depending on the outcome." The answer was simple, yet it carried a quiet sense of responsibility that caught the retired pilot's attention. Before he could ask another question, a message sounded over the terminal speakers announcing the arrival of an inbound executive flight at the neighboring gate. Several airline employees immediately looked toward the corridor connecting the executive terminal with the main concourse. Daniel barely noticed the announcement as he focused on closing the boarding process. Emily, however, instinctively glanced toward the same hallway after noticing several senior airline managers walking briskly in that direction. Their appearance suggested someone significant had just arrived. Marcus remained unaware of the growing activity. He calmly closed his folder, placed it inside his briefcase, and stood to stretch after sitting for nearly half an hour. The setting sun cast long reflections across the terminal windows, illuminating the quiet confidence on his face. Daniel looked up once again and noticed Marcus standing near the boarding area instead of leaving or complaining. For reasons he still could not explain, the certainty he had felt earlier slowly began giving way to curiosity. Somewhere beyond the corner of the terminal, footsteps echoed as an important visitor approached the departure gate, carrying information that would soon reveal just how incomplete the picture had been from the very beginning. Emily Carter quietly stepped away from the aircraft door for a brief moment, while another flight attendant welcomed the last few passengers. She approached the gate counter where Daniel Harper was completing the final departure checklist. "Do you have a second?" she asked politely. Daniel looked up from his tablet. "Of course." Emily lowered her voice. "The gentleman whose seat was changed earlier. Did the system explain why the reassignment happened?" Daniel reviewed the reservation again. "Only that the seating assignment was updated automatically. There are no additional notes attached." Emily glanced toward Marcus, who remained standing near the windows with his briefcase resting beside him. He does not seem like someone who is upset about losing a seat. Daniel offered a thoughtful smile. Not everyone reacts the same way. Emily nodded, but the answer did not completely satisfy her curiosity. She had learned that experienced travelers often revealed their character through moments exactly like this. Marcus had accepted an unexpected inconvenience without placing additional pressure on anyone trying to do their job. That kind of composure was uncommon enough to stand out. As Daniel finalized the passenger count, Emily noticed the reservation screen briefly refresh before returning to its previous display. One line caught her attention for only a second. Next to Marcus Ellison's name appeared a notation indicating a corporate partnership account linked to the reservation. The information disappeared almost immediately as another screen opened. Emily blinked, wondering whether she had imagined it. She had no authority to investigate further, nor any reason to interrupt the boarding process over a passing observation. Even so, the detail stayed in her mind. Across the waiting area, Marcus quietly placed his notebook back inside his briefcase and walked toward the large windows overlooking the aircraft. He watched ground crews complete the final cargo loading, while another aircraft taxied slowly across the runway in the distance. The scene reminded him of his earliest business trips many years before, when every ticket had been purchased with carefully saved startup money, and every meeting carried the possibility of changing his company's future. Those years had taught him that titles open very few doors compared to preparation, consistency, and respect for others. Behind him, two customer service representatives spoke quietly near another gate. One glanced toward Marcus before asking, "Is he still waiting?" The other nodded. Apparently there was a seating reassignment. He has been incredibly patient. Neither employee knew anything more than that, yet the story had quietly spread through the nearby work area because of how differently this passenger had handled the situation. Daniel finished the final departure paperwork just as a radio message reached the gate. "Executive arrival approaching gate 22, the dispatcher announced. "Please stand by for a brief coordination update." Daniel acknowledged the message without giving it much thought. Executive visits occasionally occurred when senior leadership traveled between company offices. Emily, however, noticed several airport managers straightening their jackets as they looked toward the main concourse. Their expressions suggested they were expecting someone important. Marcus remained completely unaware of the growing activity. He checked the time, picked up his briefcase, and calmly walked back toward the boarding lane after hearing the announcement for the final passengers. Daniel looked up as Marcus approached. For the first time since the seating change, he hesitated before speaking. The reservation still displayed economy. The boarding process still followed company procedure. Yet something about the quiet confidence standing in front of him made him wonder whether this ordinary departure was about to become anything but ordinary. At that exact moment, a small group of airline executives rounded the corner of the concourse, led by a woman whose arrival would soon answer questions that no computer system had managed to explain. Marcus Ellison handed his updated boarding pass to Daniel Harper without the slightest trace of resentment. The scanner produced a soft confirmation tone, and for a brief second both men looked at the display. Economy. The assignment remained unchanged. Daniel returned the boarding pass with a courteous nod. "Thank you for your patience, sir. Boarding is nearly complete." Marcus accepted the document with a small smile. "I appreciate your help." There was no sarcasm in his voice, only genuine professionalism. He stepped onto the jet bridge carrying his weathered leather briefcase, moving at the same relaxed pace he had maintained since the unexpected seat reassignment. Emily Carter welcomed him at the aircraft door with a warm smile. "Good evening, sir. Welcome aboard." Marcus thanked her and continued down the aisle toward the economy cabin without hesitation. Several passengers noticed him walking past the spacious first-class seats that had originally appeared on his boarding pass only minutes earlier. A businessman seated in row 2 quietly leaned toward his wife. "That is the gentleman from the gate." She nodded. He handled everything with remarkable grace. Neither knew anything about Marcus beyond what they had witnessed, yet both sensed there was more to the story than anyone currently understood. Marcus reached his assigned economy seat and carefully placed his briefcase beneath the seat in front of him. Before sitting, he gently straightened the folded jacket resting over one arm and looked through the window as airport vehicles continued moving across the ramp. The smaller seat did not seem to concern him. Years earlier, he had crossed the country countless times in middle seats, while building his company from a rented office with only a handful of employees. Comfortable travel had never defined success for him. Purpose always had. Meanwhile, in the front of the aircraft, Emily quietly completed the final cabin check before noticing something unusual on the electronic passenger list displayed on her service tablet. Marcus Ellison's reservation now carried a small notification indicating that additional information had recently synchronized with the airline's corporate partnership database. The note disappeared before she could read more than a few words. She frowned slightly. Reservation systems occasionally refreshed during boarding, but last-minute updates involving partnership accounts were uncommon. Emily resisted the temptation to speculate. Training had taught her that assumptions solved nothing. Facts would reveal themselves soon enough. At the gate, Daniel finished closing the aircraft door paperwork when his radio came alive once again. "Hold departure for executive arrival," the operations coordinator instructed. "Repeat, hold departure. Airline President Rebecca Lawson is approaching Gate 22 for a scheduled operational visit." Daniel immediately acknowledged the instruction and informed the flight crew that boarding would pause for several additional minutes. Inside the aircraft, passengers exchanged puzzled glances after hearing the announcement of a brief delay. Some assumed it involved maintenance. Others guessed whether. Marcus simply returned to reviewing handwritten notes inside his leather notebook, completely undisturbed by the unexpected pause. Near the front galley, Emily noticed several senior airport managers gathering outside the aircraft door. Their expressions reflected the quiet urgency that often accompanied executive visits. Through the open aircraft doorway, she caught a glimpse of a distinguished woman in a tailored charcoal suit walking confidently through the jet bridge, accompanied by members of the airline leadership team. Daniel straightened his uniform and prepared to greet the arriving executive. He still believed the earlier seating reassignment had been handled according to policy. Yet, as the airline president stepped closer to the aircraft entrance, carrying a folder marked Strategic Partnership Review, a quiet feeling settled over him that the next few minutes were about to answer questions no reservation screen had been able to explain. The aircraft door remained open as quiet conversation spread through the first-class cabin. Most passengers assumed the brief delay involved routine operations, but the atmosphere shifted the moment Airline President Rebecca Lawson stepped through the doorway. Dressed in a tailored charcoal business suit and carrying a slim leather portfolio, she greeted the flight crew with a warm smile before exchanging a few quick words with the captain. Daniel Harper stood respectfully near the entrance, while Emily Carter completed the final cabin check. Neither expected the visit to last more than a minute. Rebecca glanced through the first-class cabin as though searching for someone. Her eyes moved from one row to the next before pausing. A puzzled expression crossed her face. She quietly turned toward Daniel. "I was expecting Mr. Marcus Ellison to be on board this flight," she said. Daniel answered confidently. "He is on board, ma'am." Rebecca smiled. "Wonderful. Which first-class seat is he in?" Daniel hesitated. He looked toward the nearly full premium cabin, then back at his tablet. "Actually, there was a seating adjustment before boarding." Rebecca's expression changed slightly. "A seating adjustment?" Daniel nodded. The reservation system reassigned him to economy. For a brief second, Rebecca remained silent. There was no anger in her face, only genuine surprise. "Would you please tell me where he is seated now?" Daniel quickly reviewed the updated passenger list. "Row 24, seat C." Rebecca thanked him politely before walking down the aisle, followed at a respectful distance by Emily, who could sense that something significant was unfolding. Passengers quietly watched as the airline president continued beyond the curtain separating first class from the main cabin. Curious eyes followed her every step. Marcus Ellison remained focused on the notes inside his leather notebook until a familiar voice interrupted his concentration. "Marcus." He looked up immediately and smiled. "Rebecca." "I was not expecting to see you here." Rebecca returned the smile with genuine warmth. "Neither was I. I thought we were meeting tomorrow morning in San Francisco." Marcus closed his notebook. "That was the plan." She glanced briefly at the economy seats surrounding him before looking back at his face. "I was told there had been a seating adjustment," Marcus answered calmly. "That is correct. The reservation changed before boarding. Everyone has been very professional, and I assumed there was an operational reason." Rebecca studied him for a moment, recognizing the same composed professionalism that had defined every meeting they had shared over the past 2 years. Marcus never exaggerated problems. He preferred understanding facts before reaching conclusions. She appreciated that quality as much as his leadership. Several nearby passengers quietly exchanged surprised looks as they realized the airline president clearly knew the quiet traveler by name. Emily stood a few rows behind, now fully understanding why Marcus had carried himself with such confidence from the very beginning. Daniel remained near the front of the aircraft, unable to hear the conversation, but noticing the unmistakable familiarity between the two. Rebecca finally smiled and said, "Marcus, your company has been one of our most important strategic partners in modernizing our passenger technology systems. I cannot imagine beginning tomorrow's executive meeting without you." Marcus laughed softly. "Then I suppose we should both make sure this flight leaves on time." Rebecca smiled in return before gently replying, "Before we do that, I think we owe it to everyone involved to understand exactly how this reservation changed, because the facts matter, and they deserve to be understood before anyone draws conclusions." Rebecca Lawson and Marcus Ellison walked together toward the front of the aircraft, not with urgency, but with the quiet confidence of two professionals determined to understand the facts before reaching conclusions. Daniel Harper immediately straightened his posture as they approached. Emily Carter remained nearby, sensing that the next conversation would answer the questions that had gradually spread throughout the cabin. Rebecca smiled politely before speaking. "Daniel, thank you for your patience. Could you please walk me through what happened with Mr. Ellison's reservation?" Daniel nodded without hesitation. "Certainly. Approximately 30 minutes before departure, the reservation system updated his assignment from first class to economy. I reviewed the record twice. The system showed the new seat, so I followed the displayed assignment according to company procedure." Rebecca listened carefully without interrupting. Marcus stood quietly beside her with the same calm expression he had carried since arriving at the gate. When Daniel finished, Rebecca asked one more question. "Did the system provide an explanation for the change?" Daniel looked at his tablet again before answering. "No, ma'am. There were no additional notes attached to the update." Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. "Then you acted on the information available to you." Daniel seemed slightly relieved to hear those words. He had expected criticism, yet instead he received a fair assessment based on the facts. Rebecca turned toward Emily. "Emily, did you observe anything unusual?" Emily answered honestly, "Only that I briefly noticed a corporate partnership notification appear beside Mr. Ellison's reservation before it disappeared. I was not certain what it meant, so I did not make any assumptions." Rebecca smiled warmly. "That was exactly the right decision. When information is incomplete, observation is more valuable than speculation." Marcus quietly listened before adding his own perspective. "Everyone I interacted with treated me courteously. My only question was understanding why the assignment changed. I assumed there was a reason that simply had not reached the gate yet." Rebecca opened her leather portfolio and removed a printed document. There was, in fact, a system synchronization issue reported less than 10 minutes ago by our technology team. During a database update involving corporate partnership accounts, several reservations temporarily displayed incorrect seating information before the final synchronization completed. Operations notified executive leadership while I was walking here from another arrival. Daniel looked at the report, then at his own tablet as a new notification suddenly appeared across the screen. Reservation corrected. Original first-class assignment restored. He stared silently for a moment before looking back toward Marcus. Mr. Ellison, I sincerely apologize. Based on the information available at the time, I believed I was following the correct procedure. I now understand the reservation itself was temporarily inaccurate. Marcus smiled kindly. I appreciate your professionalism, Daniel. You made the best decision you could with the information you had. Rebecca nodded in agreement. That distinction matters. Accountability begins by understanding whether the problem came from a person, a process, or a system. Today it appears our technology created confusion for everyone involved. Several nearby passengers quietly listened as the conversation unfolded. What had once seemed like a personal conflict was now clearly revealed to be an unexpected systems error combined with incomplete information. No one had needed to raise a voice. No one had needed to assign blame before understanding the facts. Emily looked at Marcus with renewed admiration. Throughout the entire experience, he had never relied on his title, never mentioned his company, and never expected special treatment. He had simply trusted that professionalism, patience, and truth would eventually meet at the same destination. Rebecca closed the report with a thoughtful smile. Now, she said, looking first at Daniel and then at Marcus, let us make this right in the same professional spirit that brought us to this moment. Rebecca Lawson looked toward the flight crew before speaking with the calm confidence of someone who understood that leadership was demonstrated most clearly during unexpected moments. Please restore Mr. Ellison to his original first-class seat, she said. Daniel Harper immediately updated the reservation, and within seconds, the corrected boarding pass appeared on the printer beside the gate terminal. He picked it up carefully before walking toward Marcus. Mr. Ellison, your original assignment has been restored. I sincerely appreciate your patience throughout this process. Marcus accepted the boarding pass with a warm smile rather than celebration. Thank you, Daniel. I know you worked with the information available to you. Daniel nodded gratefully. I will remember that. Rebecca then addressed the nearby members of the airline management team. Please make sure our technology department reviews every reservation affected by today's synchronization error before another departure experiences the same issue. If a system creates confusion for employees and customers alike, improving the system is our responsibility. Every manager quietly agreed. Emily Carter watched the exchange with growing admiration. She had expected the resolution to focus on restoring a seat assignment. Instead, it had become a lesson in accountability that reached far beyond one passenger or one flight. Marcus gathered his briefcase and prepared to move toward the front of the aircraft, but before taking another step, he paused. Rebecca, he said, may I ask one favor? She smiled. Of course. Please do not make any decisions today because of my title. If another passenger had experienced the same problem, they would deserve the same careful review. Rebecca's expression reflected genuine respect. That is exactly why your company has become such an important partner to ours. You always focus on improving the experience for everyone, not only yourself. Marcus smiled. Technology should serve people. So should leadership. Several passengers quietly listened without interrupting. The businessman who had watched the events unfold from row 2 exchanged a thoughtful glance with his wife. Earlier they had assumed they were witnessing an ordinary seating dispute. Now they understood they had witnessed something entirely different. Respect had never depended on recognition. Recognition had simply revealed the character that had been present from the very beginning. Emily escorted Marcus back toward the first-class cabin. "Welcome back, sir," she said with a genuine smile. Marcus thanked her before placing his briefcase beneath the seat that had originally been assigned to him. The surroundings had changed, but his demeanor had not. He settled into the spacious seat with the same quiet gratitude he would have shown in any other row of the aircraft. Rebecca prepared to leave the airplane so the flight could depart on schedule. Before stepping through the aircraft door, she turned toward the cabin one final time. "Thank you all for your patience," she said warmly. "Today reminded us that professionalism begins with facts, grows through respect, and succeeds when we are willing to improve our processes." A few passengers smiled in quiet agreement. No applause followed. None was necessary. The atmosphere itself had changed. Daniel watched from the aircraft entrance as the door prepared to close. He realized the most valuable lesson from the afternoon had not been about a reservation system or an executive visitor. It had been about resisting the temptation to assume that the first answer visible on a screen always told the complete story. As the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate and began taxiing toward the runway, Marcus opened his notebook once more and wrote a single sentence across the top of a fresh page. Great leaders never ask whether someone deserves respect after success. They choose to offer respect before success is ever revealed. The flight landed in San Francisco just after sunset, and the warm glow of the terminal lights reflected across the aircraft windows as passengers prepared to leave. The journey that had begun with uncertainty now ended in quiet reflection. When the seatbelt sign turned off, travelers reached for briefcases, backpacks, and carry-on bags with the familiar rhythm that followed every arrival. Marcus Ellison remained seated until the aisle began moving, never rushing to be first. Rebecca Lawson had already continued to another terminal after wishing the crew a successful flight, leaving behind not an order but a reminder that every organization grows stronger when people seek facts before conclusions. Daniel Harper stood near the aircraft door, having traveled aboard at Rebecca's request so he could personally observe the customer experience after the reservation issue had been resolved. As Marcus approached the exit carrying his weathered leather briefcase, Daniel extended his hand with genuine respect. "Mr. Ellison, thank you again for your patience today. I hope you will accept my apology once more." Marcus shook his hand warmly. "There is nothing further to apologize for, Daniel. We both learned something valuable, and that makes today worthwhile." Daniel smiled. "I have worked in airports for nearly 18 years. Today reminded me that following procedure is important, but understanding the complete picture is equally important." Marcus nodded. "Procedures protect organizations. Curiosity protects people. The strongest leaders remember both." Emily Carter waited beside the aircraft door to thank departing passengers one final time. When Marcus reached her, she smiled with quiet confidence. "It was a privilege meeting you today, sir." Marcus returned the smile. "The privilege was mine, Emily. Never lose the habit of observing carefully before forming conclusions. It will serve you in every part of your career." Emily thanked him sincerely, already knowing those words would remain with her long after the flight number had been forgotten. Inside the terminal, Marcus walked toward the arrivals hall, where several members of his executive team waited beside large windows overlooking the runway. One colleague waved enthusiastically. "Marcus, we heard there was a delay. Everything all right?" Marcus smiled. "Everything worked out exactly as it should have." Another executive looked puzzled. "What happened?" Marcus paused for a moment before answering. "A reservation system created confusion. Good people relied on incomplete information. Then everyone involved chose professionalism over assumptions, and the problem was solved." His colleagues expected a longer story, but Marcus simply continued walking toward the conference center shuttle waiting outside the terminal. For him, the lesson mattered far more than the inconvenience. Back at the gate, Daniel watched through the terminal windows as the aircraft prepared for its next departure. He quietly opened the operations report and added a recommendation that future reservation updates include clearer notifications whenever corporate account synchronization remained incomplete. Emily submitted her own suggestion encouraging additional training about verifying unusual reservation changes before final boarding whenever operationally possible. Small improvements, she believed, often prevented larger misunderstandings. The following morning, Marcus and Rebecca stood together before hundreds of aviation executives, technology leaders, and airline professionals to begin their partnership conference. During his opening remarks, Marcus never mentioned the previous day's experience. Instead, he shared a simple principle that guided every successful organization. Innovation is not only about building better systems. It is about building systems that help good people make better decisions. Every process should protect dignity, every leader should welcome accountability, and every person deserves respect before anyone knows their title. The audience rose in quiet appreciation, not because they knew what had happened the day before, but because they recognized a truth that reached far beyond airports, boardrooms, or executive meetings. Titles may open conversations, success may earn recognition, and achievements may inspire admiration, but genuine character is revealed long before any of those things become visible. Respect offered before certainty is not merely good manners. It is the foundation upon which trust, leadership, and lasting success are built.